When it comes to crafting for your tabletop, the art and rulebooks is a great source of inspiration. Not only do these pictures convey a sense of the intended atmosphere, but also act as a great visual guide for crafting terrain or painting miniatures. As a matter of fact, this is something I tried to achieve with my Merc Boy party from a while back. And in my mind, this is also a great approach when crafting terrain. But first of all, you need a game that actually inspires you. There is the aforementioned Merc Boy for sure. However, in this video I want to show you another game. Recently I was contacted by the nice folks of Corsair Creations, a small indie developer operating from Vienna. And they wanted me to showcase their new tabletop roleplay game, The Hidden Isle, which is now live on Kickstarter. So, to make a long story short, they agreed to sponsor this video, which marks an incredible achievement for this channel and for me as a small creator. Also, and much more important for you, this game comes with its own very unique art style. This is Dioscoria, the titular Hidden Isle. In the game, this fictional island serves as a base of operations where you and your fellow agents receive missions that take place all over the world of the 16th century. Your adventures will bring you to Venice, London and other remarkable places of history. And your mission is to topple tyrants, cults and demonic forces while trying to hold on to your ideal selves or fully embrace your dark side. In preparation for this video, I was also provided with the first iteration of the 140 pages thick rulebook. This is jam-packed with lore and explanations for the setting, but there are also rules, of course. Now what you see here is the playtest version of the rules, as I'm not allowed to show you the contents of the preliminary version I received. But if you are interested in trying out this game, you can follow the appropriate link in the description below. This will bring you to the playtest rulebook, which includes test scenarios and of course the first version of the rules. If you have played Blades in the Dark, this rule set will be somewhat familiar to you, as this is based on the Forge in the Dark game engine. However, the Hidden Isle has its own very unique features that makes it stand out from other RPGs. But before I tell you what these are, let me get back to the project at hand. While reading all the little tidbits about the Hidden Isle, I stumbled across a short section about a bronze colossus protecting the island from invaders and other threats. Together with an underwater sibling made from coral, this huge protector guards the harbor area of Dioscoria. And with that, my eyes were fixed on recreating at least the overwater side of this pairing. As a base for this project, I used the same 1 foot by 1 foot tiles I already used previously on this channel. I like these tiles so much, as these give me the opportunity to build something resembling a diorama, but also keeps what I built in the realm of playability. Now I imagined a rocky coastline with the bronze colossus overlooking the harbor area. While the harbor itself won't be featured in this build, as this would blow this whole thing way out of proportion, I wanted to try out a simple way of adding water to a board. And with that I had my basic layout set. One corner would be the ocean, while a cliff would separate this from the land side. On top of that cliff would be, as already said, the colossus with a short cobblestone street leading to the top. For the cliff I used cork bark. The natural look of the bark translates incredibly well to in-scale rock formations. But if you have seen my video about my graveyard terrain, you already know that. I glued the bark pieces in place with PVA. With that I added chunks of EPS foam to the land side. This stuff helps me bulk up the areas where I wanted the ground to be elevated. To adhere them all together, I used this specific EPS glue, which might be harder to come by in the US or Canada. But if you know a fitting substitute that is widely available in your area, please feel free to let me know in the comments. What's so great about this particular glue is that you can still use hot wire cutters to get this collection of leftovers into shape. After doing exactly that, I covered the exposed EPS with sculptor mold. While mixing that, I also added a bit of brown paint to give the compound an earthy color. This way you won't see white scratches in case you damage the surface later. But I have to admit that my mix could have used a bit more paint. For the cobblestone street I used a texture roller in combination with air drying clay. The texture roller I used is from my mini factory and printed on a FDM printer. Buying texture rollers can be expensive, so these free printable rollers are a great substitute. Provided of course you have access to a 3D printer. In any case, you'll find the link down in the description below. I rolled out a bit of clay on baking paper and brought the texture roller over the clay. Now, there is a bit of a learning curve here. For example, you want your roller a bit moist, so the clay doesn't stick to it. But you don't want it too wet, as this would have a similar effect. Also, don't press it too much into your clay, as this would again result in chunks sticking to the roller. After successfully applying the texture, I carefully took the whole street and put it on top of the sculptor mold. And in the end I smoothed over the edges with my fingers. While letting that dry, I made a simple pedestal for the colossus out of XPS foam. I also built a small bench for a reading place near the statue. My approach here was pretty simple. First I cut out the very blocky looking bench, and after that I used nail files to round off the corners. This way you get a somewhat sculpted looking stone bench. Thankfully XPS is dense enough to be sanded down like that. I attached 2 tiny XPS blocks as bench legs and attached both, the pedestal and the bench, to their designated areas. I also had these wall segments lying around. In my mind the straight undamaged segment looked fitting, so I took it and adhered it next to the road. I used sculptor mold, with much more paint this time, to cover the gaps and let the whole piece dry. Now as a next step I wanted to add a bit more texture to the wall, pedestal and the bench. I also wanted to seal in the bark, as this tends to be very dirty. This is a natural product after all. So I mixed my stone texture paste out of tile grout, PVA and a bit of water, which I, after adding a bit of indigo paint, applied to every stone surface. Now paint-wise, I wanted to emulate the color scheme used in the map of Dioscoria. Therefore, I concentrated on varying blue-violet tones that would be contrasted by yellow ochre earth tones. So I first based every earth surface with this aptly titled Sahara beige. As Dioscoria is situated in the Arabian Sea, it makes sense to have it a bit dusty and dry looking. For the rocks, roads and the wall, I first started to wash these pieces with a watered down violet. That admittedly went on a bit thick in a few places. This wouldn't matter that much, however, as I really like the resulting look of this. I dry brushed these pieces with a light blue, which I mixed out of indigo and off-white, and on top of that I rounded off the stone pieces with a pure off-white. I also dry brushed the cobblestone road with this color. At that point the piece was ready for the ground texture. This is pre-mixed basing sand if you will. It contains fine grit basing sand and tile grout. The hue comes from various assortments of pigments, as I tried to give this very bright combination a darker, more earthy tone. For this project, however, I wanted to add more yellow into the mix to get more into the direction of what I wanted. And in hindsight, I should have mixed a new batch with ochre. To contrast this, I did mix a new batch with medium and coarse grit, as well as red ochre and blue pigments. This resulted in a violet shaded texture sand for areas close to the cliff. I covered the areas where I wanted this with PVA and added first the medium coarse mix and applied the fine sand afterwards. After I finished this and removed all the excess, I doused the area in isopropyl alcohol and applied watered down PVA via a pipette. This way I made sure the grit is locked in place. I also added a bit of flock while the PVA was still wet. After letting that thoroughly dry, I used yellow ochre pigment and a self-made violet mix to get back the tones I intended for the piece. I sealed everything in with a coat of isopropyl alcohol and went to the water side. For the water I used this stuff. This is pouring medium and this is normally used for, well, acrylic pouring, the technique for abstract painting. Using this stuff results in a very unique looking finish. But it's better to show you rather than tell you. First I mixed 2 colors with this stuff, the aforementioned indigo for the deep water and the lighter green blue for the shore areas. And this was then simply applied with a brush. First a darker tone and on top of that the lighter color where I wanted it. Thanks to the medium, both colors don't really mix, but you get this flowing looking transition which looks pretty great for water effects in my mind. Just go back and forth until you are happy with the result. After that was dry, I used Vallejo's water texture paste on top of that. Here I used a makeup brush as it has very long bristles that helped me with getting the right look for the water. I applied this via a stippling motion and let that thoroughly dry. To round off the water, I used white paint and dry brushed it on the peaks of the water. This is a bit of a do or die moment as you can easily have too much paint on your brush and really ruin this water effect, so better test it beforehand. Now at that point you are probably asking yourself, what does all that have to do with Christian Bale? Well, let me explain. Amongst other things, Corsair Creations sent me this set of tarot cards. These are essential for a game of the Hidden Isle, as your standard tests and challenges are not decided by the throw of a dice, but by these cards. This has also the added benefit of being an in-universe thing, which adds a lot to the immersion factor. As a GM, you can also use this in combination with a mechanic to generate adventures on the fly. So picture a scene where you essentially do a tarot reading in session and discover with your players where to go and what to do. I have to admit that I didn't get to try out this feature, but it sounds really interesting for sure. You may be even able to use this in other roleplay games. Now this specific tarot deck is also available via the Kickstarter and of course features art from the game itself. Therefore I used this to find ideas for the look of the bronze colossus. The cards of the Empress and the Emperor intrigued me the most, and here it finally clicked. I had this action figure of Gore the God Butcher portrayed by, well, Christian Bale in the latest Thor movie. In my mind, the simple robes and the stoic expression could work very well in the universe of the Hidden Isle. So I decided to use this as a base for my bronze colossus. The figure can be arranged in all manners of poses. This is surely great for playability, but not so great when you want to convert this into terrain. So after deciding on a pose, I used Milliput to A, lock the joints in place, and B, to hide them. I also removed all those gnarly scars on the figure with my Dremel tool. Alternatively, you could also use your hobby knife for that, just don't cut yourself. I also wasn't the biggest fan of the texture of the robe, so I used Milliput in combination with isopropyl alcohol to smooth that out. Now doing that took a lot of time, so let me use this time to thank my newest patrons who decided to join since the last video. Zombor Swab and Avery. Thank you both for joining. With your small contribution of €3 or dollars, you help me run this channel and help me with making more videos. If you enjoy my videos and want to help me out, you can do so by joining my Patreon as well. You get exclusive access to previews, behind the scenes material, and also get the chance to vote on upcoming topics. Again, thanks to every single one of my patrons, and let's get back to the statue. While letting the Milliput dry, I built a simple scepter out of a wooden skewer and a small paper ball I found at a crafting store. I sealed the paper ball with PVA and adhered the scepter to the right hand with superglue. And in the end I attached the cape and also pinned the colossus. Now for painting this, I wanted a more magical look to the bronze, so I opted to go with these color shifters by Vallejo. After priming the figure in black, I simply sprayed this all over it with my airbrush. This was also a great opportunity to try out these metallic markers from AK Interactive, which I used to add some highlights. These work reasonably well, but similar to my experiment with my Merkboy party, these come with a slight learning curve as the paint distribution isn't as consistent. After adding the highlights, I varnished the colossus with satin varnish. Now to round this thing off, I mix myself a blue-green oil wash to get a simple patina effect. If you are interested in how I mix these washes, you can check out my Forbidden Song video where I explain this process in detail. I covered the statue with a wash, waited for about an hour and then started to remove the excess with sponges and voila, simple patina. And with that, I let the piece dry and went to the next step. As I mentioned, Dioscorea is situated in the Arabian Sea. As a matter of fact, it is somewhat modeled after the real island of Socotra, which has a very unique flora as it's known for these very unique looking trees. These are called dragon blood trees as their sap is indeed red as blood. So naturally I wanted one for this project. I started with using this wood stick as my tree trunk. My plan was to use polymer clay to model the first branches, so for that I needed to add wires to give these modeled branches a bit of sturdiness. I drilled holes to one side of the stick and simply inserted aluminium wires. To fix them in place, I used PVA, as this wouldn't warp during the baking step. The clay I used was super sculpty, but you could go with other brands like Fimo as well. I just find this particular stuff more comfortable to use. I modeled the branches and baked the tree at 130 degrees Celsius in my oven. After that I added a few real wood pieces to break off the monotony of the polymer branches and to add a bit more visual clutter. I again baked the piece and added more and more branches. When I was happy with the look, I topped off the tree with a layer of clay, baked that and started to model the tree crown. Here I used aluminium foil to bulk up the crown, which also saved me a lot of clay. I baked the tree for the last time, and when that cooled off, I added texture paste to the top of the tree. These trees have an almost white bark, so to emulate that I first primed the whole tree in brown and dry brushed a lighter brown, an olive green, and in the end an off-white onto the wood parts. I also covered the crown completely in PVA and added static grass via my applicator to get something that was similar to the upright standing leaves of the tree. Now if you use static grass that has the right color, you could leave it at that. But again, I wanted to emulate the color scheme of the map and applied various transparent inks. First green, then violet, and in the end a bit of turquoise here and there. As these inks are a bit glossy, I used matte varnish to finish the tree. This also suppressed the glossy bits of PVA that shined through. In the end, I drilled fitting holes for the tree and the colossus onto the board. Added these, and with that, the colossus of Dioscorea was ready for its eternal duty. And here is the bronze colossus of Dioscorea standing watch over the cliffs of the hidden isle. This project felt a bit like a culmination of projects from last year, and yeah, I had so much fun building this. I'm especially proud of how the colossus itself turned out, and also this water technique is something I will definitely add to my repertoire for future projects. Now what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and if you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, please check out the Hidden Isle over on Kickstarter, and thanks again to Corsa Creations for supporting small creators. If you also want to support a small creator, you can check out my Patreon page or leave me a tip here via the thanks function. But nevertheless, thank you so much for your time and giving this video a watch. If you like similar projects, you can check out my last video where I built a few houses for the tabletop. I really hope to see you on the next one, and until then, farewell, fellow adventurers.